Before we get into today's episode, just a quick heads up. This is one of those conversations that may hit a nerve. We're talking about respect, authority, and how things have changed from one generation to the next, and not everyone is going to see it the same way. Some of you will agree, some of you won't, and that's okay. The goal here isn't to attack or blame, it's to look at what's happening and ask why it feels so different now. At the same time, this isn't about blindly defending authority either. Respect and accountability can exist together, and part of this conversation is figuring out where that balance has been lost. So listen with an open mind, think about your own experiences, and decide for yourself where you stand. This is Data and Dissonance, where we speak truth and stir thought.
There was a time, not that long ago, when respect wasn't something you debated, it was something you understood. You didn't talk over your parents, you didn't challenge your teachers like they were equals, and you didn't look at authority figures as something to test or push against just because you felt like it. It wasn't about fear, it was about structure, about knowing there were lines you didn't cross because there were consequences if you did. And somewhere along the way, that entire foundation started to crack. Now you look around, and it feels like everything's flipped. Kids talk back like they're in charge. Classrooms look more like battlegrounds than places of learning. And authority, whether it's parents, teachers, or law enforcement, isn't respected, it's questioned, challenged, and in some cases outright ignored. And it's not just isolated incidents anymore. It's becoming the norm. You see it online, you see it in public, you see it in everyday interactions, and you can't help but ask, when did this become acceptable? But here's where it gets complicated, because at the same time, there are people who will tell you this shift was necessary, that blind respect isn't healthy, that authority figures haven't always earned that respect, and that questioning power is part of a more aware, more informed generation. And maybe there's some truth in that. Maybe not everything from the past should be carried forward. But if that's the case, why does it feel less like awareness and more like a complete breakdown of boundaries? So tonight, we're digging into it. What actually changed? Did we stop teaching respect? Or did authority lose the right to expect it? Because if respect is gone and authority means nothing, then what replaces it? And more importantly, what kind of society are we building if nobody answers to anything anymore? All right, let's bring in the crew. Because if we're talking about respect, authority, and how everything feels like it's gone sideways, there is no way I'm tackling this one solo. We need the full spectrum tonight. The fire, the balance, the conspiracy board, and of course, the reality check that's probably going to annoy at least half the audience. So buckle up because this one's about to get a little heated. First up, Brian. Now, Brian grew up in a time where because I said so wasn't a suggestion, it was the end of the conversation. This man hears a kid talk back in public and you can literally see his blood pressure spike like he's about to file a complaint with society itself. Brian's been waiting for this episode like it's his Super Bowl, so I already know he's coming in hot. Probably somewhere between we lost discipline and we need to bring it back yesterday. Next, Rachel. The voice of reason, the balance, the one who's going to come in and remind everyone that maybe not everything from the past was perfect. Rachel's going to walk that line between respect and accountability and somehow do it without getting yelled at. Or maybe she will, depending on how fired up Brian gets in about 30 seconds. Either way, she's here to make sure we don't just turn this into a full-blown rant session, even if we're all tempted to. Then we've got Daniel. Now Daniel doesn't just think respect disappeared, he thinks it was taken. Slowly, strategically, piece by piece. He's already got a mental whiteboard connecting parenting trends, education systems, media influence, and probably 3 things the rest of us haven't even thought about yet. If you hear him say, "This wasn't accidental," just know we're about to go down a rabbit hole whether we plan to or not. And finally, Skylar. Because you can't have this conversation without someone stepping in and saying, "Hold on, maybe authority hasn't exactly been perfect either." Skylar's going to challenge the idea that respect should just be automatic, and she's not afraid to call out hypocrisy when she sees it. Which means, yeah, there's a very real chance she and Brian are about to go head-to-head like it's a main event. And me, I'll be right here in the middle of it, trying to keep this thing on the rails, asking the questions, and probably throwing a few jabs of my own along the way. So let's get into it, because this one's going to hit close to home for a lot of people. All right. Let's get into it because this one's been building for a while. I want you to really think about this, not as some political talking point, not as something you saw in a headline, but from your own life. When we were growing up, there were lines, clear lines. You didn't talk back to your parents like you were negotiating a contract. You didn't challenge your teachers like they were just another person in the room. And you sure as hell didn't look at law enforcement like they were optional authority. There was an understanding, unspoken but real, that certain roles carried weight, not because those people were perfect, but because the structure mattered. Now, fast forward to today, and it feels like that entire foundation has shifted. Kids arguing with parents like they're equals, classrooms where teachers are trying to manage behavior more than they're teaching, and authority figures being questioned at every turn, not just in serious situations, but over everything. And look, I'm not saying authority has always gotten it right. It hasn't. There have been abuses, mistakes, and reasons for people to question it. But what we're seeing now doesn't feel like healthy accountability. It feels like a complete erosion of respect altogether. Like somewhere along the way, we went from respect the role to challenge everything. And now nobody really answers to anything. And that's where this gets real. Because this isn't just about kids or schools or one generation. This is about culture. This is about what we're teaching, what we're rewarding, and what we're tolerating. Social media amplifies the loudest voices, not the most respectful ones. Parents are second guessed at every turn. Teachers are limited in what they can even do. Law enforcement is viewed through a political lens before anything else. So the question becomes, is this the result of a system that failed over time? Or did we slowly stop valuing respect as something foundational in the first place? Because if respect is no longer the baseline, then what replaces it? What holds things together when authority doesn't carry weight anymore? Is this a correction from the past, or are we watching the beginning of something that leads to more chaos than progress? So let me start here. Brian, when you look at what's happening right now, kids talking back, authority being challenged at every level, do you see this as a failure of parenting and discipline? Or do you think something bigger changed in the culture that got us here?
Look, I'm going to say it straight. This is a failure of parenting first, culture second. We can blame social media, we can blame schools, we can blame politics all day long. But at the end of the day, kids don't raise themselves. Somewhere along the line, parents stopped being parents and started trying to be friends. Discipline turned into, let's talk about your feelings. Consequences turned into negotiations. And now you've got kids who think they're on equal footing with adults before they've even lived long enough to understand how the world works. And you see it everywhere now. It's not even shocking anymore. Kids yelling at their parents in public like there's no line, teachers getting disrespected in their own classrooms, and people acting like law enforcement is something you get to debate in the moment instead of comply with. That didn't come out of nowhere. That came from years of lowering standards and removing consequences. You don't get respect if there's nothing backing it up. You don't get order if nobody's in charge. And yeah, culture made it worse. Social media rewards bad behavior. The louder, more disrespectful, more outrageous you are, the more attention you get. So now kids don't just get away with it, they get rewarded for it. And we sit here acting surprised like we don't know how we got here. We do know. We just don't want to admit that somewhere along the way we stopped holding the line.
Yeah. And Brian, I'm not going to lie, there's a lot in what you just said that hits because I've seen it too. I've seen parents hesitate to correct their own kids in public, like they're worried about being judged more than they're worried about the behavior itself. I've seen teachers who look more like they're managing chaos than actually teaching, and you can tell the authority just isn't there the way it used to be. And when consequences disappear, respect usually goes right along with it. But at the same time, I don't think it's as simple as just saying parents failed and that's the end of it, because something bigger did shift. Authority used to come with an automatic level of respect, whether it was a parent, a teacher, or a cop. And now it feels like that respect has to be earned in real time, in every interaction. And maybe part of that is because people have seen authority get it wrong over the years, and that trust started to crack. The problem is, instead of finding a balance, it feels like we swung all the way to the other side, where now everything gets questioned, challenged, or dismissed outright. So, Rachel, let me bring you in here. Do you think what we're seeing is mainly a breakdown in discipline and parenting? Or do you think authority itself lost something over time that changed how people respond to it?
Yeah, and I think it's both. And that's what makes this so complicated. Because I do agree that something has changed in parenting. There's definitely been a shift toward more negotiation, more leniency, and in some cases, less structure. And structure matters. Kids need boundaries. They need to understand that actions have consequences and that not everything is up for debate. That part hasn't changed, even if the approach has. But I also think we have to be honest about the other side of this. Authority doesn't automatically command respect the way it used to. And part of that is because people have seen it fail, or abuse its position, or act inconsistently. And when that happens over time, whether it's in schools, law enforcement, or even within families, that automatic respect starts to erode. People, especially younger generations, are more aware, more connected, and more willing to question things they don't understand or don't agree with. And questioning by itself isn't a bad thing. It can actually be healthy. The problem is, like you said, we didn't find a balance. We went from don't question anything to question everything. And somewhere in that shift, respect got lost in the noise. Because there's a difference between asking questions and being outright disrespectful. There's a difference between holding someone accountable and completely dismissing their role. And right now, those lines feel blurred. So I don't think the answer is going back to blind respect, but I also don't think what we have now is working either. There has to be a middle ground where authority is both respected and held accountable. And I'm not sure we've figured out how to do that yet.
Yeah. And that middle ground you're talking about, that's exactly where it feels like we lost control of this thing. Because I agree with you. Questioning authority isn't inherently bad. There were times in the past where people probably should have asked more questions and didn't. But what we're seeing now doesn't feel like thoughtful questioning. It feels reactive, emotional, and in a lot of cases, just flat out disrespectful. And I think part of the problem is we blurred the lines between accountability and authority. Like you said, holding someone accountable is one thing, but dismissing the role entirely is something different. And right now, it feels like the role itself doesn't carry weight anymore. Being a teacher doesn't mean what it used to. Being a parent doesn't carry the same authority it used to. Even law enforcement, people don't see the position first, they see the debate first. And once that shift happens, it's really hard to pull it back. But Daniel, I already know you're looking at this from a bigger picture angle. Do you think this breakdown in respect just happened naturally over time? Or do you think there were larger forces, cultural, institutional, maybe even intentional, that pushed us in this direction?
Yeah, I don't think this was accidental at all. I think what you're seeing right now is the result of a slow, consistent shift that's been happening for decades. You don't just wake up one day and suddenly kids don't respect parents, students don't respect teachers, and authority doesn't carry weight anymore. That's not random. That's the breakdown of multiple systems at the same time. Family structure weakens, schools lose control, media changes the narrative, and suddenly, authority isn't something to respect. It's something to question by default. And here's the part people don't like to hear. When authority breaks down, it doesn't create freedom. It creates instability. Because if people stop respecting local immediate authority, parents, teachers, community leaders, then what fills that vacuum? Usually something bigger, something more centralized. People think they're gaining independence, but what they're actually losing is structure at the ground level. And once that's gone, it's a lot easier for larger systems to step in and define what's acceptable behavior. You can even see it in how culture shifted. Media went from reinforcing structure to constantly challenging it. Social platforms reward rebellion, not discipline. And institutions, schools especially, became more concerned with avoiding conflict than maintaining authority. So what you end up with is a generation that doesn't inherently respect anything because nothing consistently demonstrated why it should be respected in the first place. So no, I don't think this just happened. I think it was a combination of cultural influence, institutional decisions, and yes, in some cases, intentional shifts in how authority is viewed. And now, we're living in the result of that.
Yeah. And that's where this starts to feel a little uncomfortable because whether someone agrees with you completely or not, Daniel, there's something in there that makes people stop and think. Because when you zoom out, it does feel like multiple things started breaking down at the same time: family structure, schools, media messaging, and now we're looking at the end result, trying to figure out how we got here. And I'll be honest, I don't know if I land fully on the this was intentional side, but I do think we underestimated what would happen if you remove structure without replacing it with something solid. Because, like you said, when that foundation weakens, it doesn't just create freedom, it creates confusion. And confusion doesn't lead to respect. It usually leads to people just doing whatever they think they can get away with. But Skylar, let me bring you in here because I know you're going to push back on some of this. Do you think what we're seeing is a breakdown of respect? Or do you think this is actually a correction where younger generations are refusing to blindly follow authority that hasn't always earned it?
Yeah, I'm definitely going to push back a little here because I think calling this a breakdown of respect only tells part of the story. I don't disagree that behavior has changed. You can see that everywhere. But I think it's important to ask why before we just label it as entitlement or disrespect. Younger generations didn't just wake up one day and decide to reject authority for no reason. They grew up in a time where information is everywhere, where mistakes by authority figures are visible in real time, and where trust wasn't automatically reinforced the way it might have been in the past. And when people see inconsistency, hypocrisy, or abuse of power, even if it's not constant, even if it's not everyone, it changes how they respond. It makes them more skeptical, more questioning, and less willing to just accept things at face value. And I don't think that's entirely a bad thing. Blind respect can protect bad systems just as much as it can maintain order. So some of what we're seeing might actually be a correction, a push toward accountability that maybe didn't exist strongly enough before. But and this is where I'll agree with you guys. I do think it's gone too far in some cases because questioning authority doesn't mean dismissing it entirely. And right now there are definitely moments where that line gets crossed, where it turns into disrespect or chaos or just a lack of basic boundaries. So I don't think the answer is going back to how things used to be, but I also don't think what we have now is working either. Like Rachel said, there has to be a balance. And I think we're still trying to figure out what that even looks like.
Yeah. And I think that's the thread that runs through all of this. Somewhere along the way, the balance broke. Because listening to all of you, there's truth in every piece of it. Brian's right. Discipline and structure matter, and when those weaken, you feel it immediately. Rachel's right. Respect without accountability doesn't work either. Daniel's looking at the bigger picture of how all of this shifted at once. And Skylar, you're right too. Questioning authority isn't inherently wrong, but where it lands right now doesn't feel like balance, it feels like overcorrection. And that's the part that sticks with me, Laura, because when we were growing up, respect was the baseline. It wasn't perfect, but it was understood. Now it feels like respect is optional, and not just optional, but sometimes viewed as something you have to justify before you give it. And when that becomes the norm, everything starts to feel unstable. Homes feel different, classrooms feel different, even everyday interactions feel more tense, more confrontational, more unpredictable. So maybe the real question isn't just what happened to respect. Maybe it's this: do we even agree anymore on what respect is supposed to look like? Because if we don't, then we're not just dealing with a shift in behavior, we're dealing with a shift in values. And that's a much bigger conversation than just kids talking back or authority being challenged.
You know, it's funny. We're sitting here talking about respect, discipline, structure, and how much of that feels like it's slipping away. And maybe that's why more people right now are looking for something that feels a little more grounded, a little more old school, something that actually stands for something. That's exactly what we've been building over at Data and Dissonance. This isn't just merch, it's a mindset. Whether it's the hoodies, the hats, the bumper stickers, or even the coffee blends, everything we put out is rooted in that same idea we're talking about tonight. Values that don't change just because the culture does. Things like discipline, accountability, and yes, respect. And if you're the type of person who still believes in earning your way, standing your ground, and not folding every time the world shifts directions, then you'll probably find something over there that feels like it was made for you. From the High Lakes light roast to the bitter root dark roast, to gear that says exactly what you're thinking without you having to say a word. It's all part of the same mission. So if that resonates with you, go check it out. Grab something that represents where you stand. Because in a world where everything feels like it's changing, sometimes it's not a bad thing to hold on to what doesn't.
You know, the more I sit with this conversation, the more it feels like we're not just talking about kids or schools or even authority. We're talking about something deeper than that. We're talking about the foundation of how a society holds itself together. Because respect isn't just about saying yes, sir, or no, ma'am. It's about understanding that not everything revolves around you, that there are roles, boundaries, and structures that exist for a reason. And when that understanding starts to disappear, you don't just lose order, you lose stability. And I keep coming back to this idea that somewhere along the way, we didn't just challenge authority, we stripped it of meaning. We went from teaching respect as a starting point to treating it like something that has to be negotiated in every single interaction. And look, I get it. Authority hasn't always been perfect. There have been failures, abuses, and reasons for people to question it. But instead of fixing those issues and strengthening the system, it feels like we swung so far in the other direction that now everything is up for debate, and nothing really carries weight anymore. Because here's the reality. When respect becomes optional, everything becomes harder. Parenting becomes harder. Teaching becomes harder. Law enforcement becomes harder. Even just basic, everyday interactions become more tense, more confrontational, more unpredictable. And that doesn't create a better society. It creates a fractured one, a place where everyone is pushing their own boundaries, but nobody agrees on where those boundaries should even be. So maybe the question isn't whether we go back to the way things were, because time doesn't move backward. Maybe the question is whether we can rebuild something better, something that holds on to accountability but also restores a baseline level of respect. Because without that baseline, without that shared understanding, we're not just losing authority, we're losing the structure that keeps everything from falling apart. And that's something worth thinking about, not just as a headline, not just as a debate, but as something that affects how we live, how we raise the next generation, and what kind of world we're leaving behind. Because if respect is gone, what exactly are we replacing it with? Remember to speak truth. Stir thought.
This episode of Data and Dissonance is brought to you by the Caleb Rourke Thriller series, a story built for times exactly like the ones we're living in. If you're into high-stakes action, government secrets, and a world where nothing is as it seems, then you need to check out The Covenant Protocol, The Prophet Directive, and the latest release, Black Echo Rising. These aren't just thrillers, they're stories about power, control, truth, and what happens when the systems people trust start to break down. If you've been listening to this show and thinking, this feels bigger than what we're being told, these books take that idea and run with it. And the creative world behind Data and Dissonance doesn't stop there. It's also backed by the music, real, raw, and rooted in experience. If you're into that 90s grunge, emotionally driven sound, think along the lines of Pearl Jam or Alice in Chains. Then the album Uncaged is going to hit you. That project was built from real-life struggle, pain, and the kind of battles that don't just go away when the noise dies down. And if country is more your lane, then check out Four Wheelers and Hallelujah, a mix of faith, freedom, small-town values, and the everyday American life that doesn't always get a spotlight. Tracks like Stand Tall Charlie carry that message of resilience that runs through everything we do here. So whether you're looking for a story that pulls you in, or music that actually means something, it's all part of the same mission. You can find the books on Amazon and the music on Spotify and all major streaming platforms. Go check it out and support the work that helps keep conversations like this going.